So I still unfortunately have to be in that camp that this is just lower highs until proven otherwise. And, you know, in the same way, if we keep testing this trend line here, we could eventually break down below it.
And I think what you said is very important, is that, you know, you're in my job, we're strictly about the charts and what they're showing us. And it doesn't mean that you can't tell us something else. Like, I mean, it could break those levels and all of a sudden, you know, we'd have to change our tune essentially. But we have to stay true to the data. We can't just go on what we hope, what we dream. Oh, wouldn't it be nice if I bought a ton of ADA and just had it go to the moon? That's hopes and dreams. We don't make money that way. We make money by putting probabilities in our favor, and how we do that is by using the data to kind of give us that little bit of an edge that makes us a winning trader. So I think that's opposite, right? I mean, people get bearish on the dollar rips higher. Is the dollar going higher because rates are going higher? Is the dollar going higher because the rest of the world's in a much crappier position than the US? Is it
And yeah, so I think that's the thing to look at is if the dollar gets this pullback in mid-October, just like it did in 2014, you know, what happens in November, December as the Fed keeps draining liquidity?
Yeah, and I think that's a great
I think that that it was over, that the secondary scare was over. But when I look at the S&P, you know, we did just have a pretty big correction. This is like an 8% drop in August or September. Yeah. So, like, while my bias honestly is that it will likely go lower eventually, like I also think that
if Bitcoin and Ethereum roll back over in the next few months, the altcoin market could experience a significant drop of around 40% on their Bitcoin pairs. Any additional information that altcoins can provide us with makes the clarity and transparency much better, allowing even retail investors to make more informed decisions. The market's nonlinear movement and emotional swings can lead to portfolio losses, highlighting the importance of understanding market dynamics. Technical analysis applies to any asset because it's about the people trading it, not the specific asset itself. In a bull market, no one cares about bad news, and in a bear market, no one cares about good news. Combining two trend lines can create a stronger support level, making it an even better buying opportunity for Ethereum if it pulls back into that area. In this video, two financial experts, Gareth Soloway and Benjamin Cowen,
about sort of selling off into the
discuss about various
just a few days before, pumping into it and then fading. And that's still what's going on at this point, right? I mean, now look, things are always subject to change, but at this point, like, I feel like expectations have been met in that, you know, that look, the other thing too is the markets move stochastically, right? It's not a linear path, and that's what we have to sort of accept. So I'm still thinking that the main purpose of this pump is to, as I've said before, is to break altcoins down on their Bitcoin pairs. And that's what's happening, right? Like, look at the altcoins. You know, a lot of people keep saying, well, what's the narrative fueling the Bitcoin rally? I'm like, well, look at the altcoins, right? Most of them are red against Bitcoin on the day. And so I still think a lot of this is just liquidity leaving the altcoin market and going back to Bitcoin. What do you think about this?
No, I think ultimately, you know, the charts themselves when it comes to Bitcoin. So we could see this. And in fact, in my game plan in my morning session, and I'll throw up my charts here real quick. I talked last week on Thursday and I said, listen, Bitcoin has now broken above a key trend line. It's now short-term bullish. And I'll just show you guys that. So basically we have this orange trend line. In fact, I'm going to change the color of it so it really highlights here. We'll go to, I don't know if you guys can see that. We'll go to pink. What the hell? So here's your pivot high. We hit it here. We hit it here. We hit it here. And what we know from trend lines is that the more we hit a line, the weaker it becomes. The same thought process, like I said before to you guys, is that when you ram into a door, it's probably not going to break down on this. You're like Superman, right? Or Arnold Schwarzenegger. So you have to ram it a few times. The more you ram it, the weaker that lock becomes until it breaks. Here we closed last Thursday above that line. Short term, and we're talking very short term, you have a short term view of, let's say, 1 week out, all of a sudden it flipped to being bullish. And we see the follow through on Sunday night into Monday here today. Now, my issue is that we're now coming into some new resistance. Not only was this little pivot top a little bit, we're above it slightly, but you have all this kind of all this low consolidation right here around 29,000. That's also going to be all this sideways chop is now going to be resistance right up here. So again, could we go a little higher in the near term? Yes, charts right now are still slightly positive. But ultimately, I'm skeptical mainly because we have broken this upsloping orange trend line. And I think we could even go as high as retesting that, which would really get the bulls on board. But if we can't get through this area, this 31, 32,000 level, then this to me, again, is a break trend line, retrace to the scene of the crime that eventually could roll over. I will say this, though, is that last week I highlighted a few altcoins, right? We talked Cardano. Look at this. Look at the wedge pattern we had talked about. And I was very specific in talking about this in the last no shill zone last Tuesday, saying that you can keep a tight stop here. And basically any daily close below the low of this wedge pattern, you just stop out and you can try to see if you can let this breakout occur. And sure enough, it did. Same thing with Matic, Polygon, same kind of deal. Broke out, stayed above, and then kind of pops. Now, again, I'm in the position of saying, you like Ben, it's probably smarter to take profits on this run, inch in, inch out a little bit, let it run a little bit more, inch out, versus just hoping that this is a new bull market in the altcoins. But certainly
market and trends. Matic, Polygon, is showing signs of a breakout, potentially indicating a short-term rally with a target of around 83 cents. A pullback in Bitcoin dominance could lead to renewed interest in altcoins and potentially drive the market to higher levels. The possibility of Ethereum dropping to a new low of around $600 presents a potentially lucrative opportunity for investors. The comparison between the Nasdaq's peak and retreat during the dot-com crash and Ethereum's potential future trajectory suggests that Ethereum could reach new highs in the future, possibly surpassing its previous peak of $16,000.
Right, so you mentioned like the Bitcoin, and we talked about this previously as well. Like, when we get this rally, it could return to sort of where it broke down from, right? And actually, ADA did that exact thing not that long ago, right? So if we remember this dump over here that we got in June, and then we look what happened with ADA, right? It retraced all the way back up to where the breakdown point occurred, right? It sort of swept that level, only to then go all the way back down. And one of the other things I think it's important to point out with ADA as well on a larger time frame is that we've been sort of bouncing off of these lows for a long time, right? And this bounce here, that weekly candle, that was a 19% move off of that low. This one here, this was a 12% move. This one last week, a 9% move. So to me, what it looks like we're just continuing to put in these, lower highs, and that eventually this could easily, break the downside, right? Now, again, right now, no one wants to believe that because we are in the middle of a move up. But I would also say that it's fascinating market psychology, right? It was only like a month or two ago where a 27-cent ADA would have been seen as very bearish, right? And now it's being seen as a very bullish thing. So yeah, I'm still in the same camp. And if you look at the altcoin market sort of collectively, right, what we'll notice is that it still is below the 50-week moving average, which is something that it hasn't really been able to sustainably break above. And I believe it's also below the 20-week SMA, or the bull market support, the 21-week EMA and the 20-week. So you can see it's still right around there. So look, at this point, I think it's more likely to be a lower high than anything else, right? And so this high over here for total 3, the altcoin market was all the way up at around 378 billion. Now, do you remember that high? That was when we got the SEC Ripple news. And on that high, a lot of people flooded into the altcoin market because this is fundamentally changing everything, and there's no way alts can go lower. And then look what happened, right? We just completely faded back down.
Two financial experts, Gareth Soloway and Benjamin Cowen, discuss about various asset classes, including platinum, copper, gold, silver, crypto, and stocks, with upcoming data on CPI, and emphasized the importance of sharing the valuable insights while being cautious of fake accounts. Listen to them attentively.
What are your thoughts on the dollar?
I think it's a combination of all of that. I think that this is just a search for lower risk stuff. And the U.S. economy, while I think it is showing some signs of weakness, it's not as weak as, say, its counterparts elsewhere. And so people are seeking the relative safety of the dollar. And I think the issue with that is, the thing too, is that we know liquidity is drying up. And when liquidity dries up, cash can be a safe haven, right? I mean, that cash can be, can be seen as king at various phases of the market cycle when asset prices are going down. And remember, the Fed wants asset prices to go down because they want, I mean, they're not going to say that, but it would be great in terms of getting inflation back down. I looked and I was trying to figure out, when is the last time the dollar put in 12 green weeks in a row, right? I mean, I don't know if this is going to be a 12th green week or not. We'll have to wait to see. But believe it or not, the last time I think was over here in 2014, right? I believe this was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, this was like at least a dozen green weeks in a row. And then what happened, right? At some point we got a little bit of a pullback here on the dollar, which I'm sure led to a lot of people thinking, all right, now it's going to go back down. But then it just continued to shoot up, right, into the early part of 2015. And so I think that's the concern is, at this point, I think markets are sort of discounting it and saying, all right, it's no big deal. It's still well away from the highs. What if we fast forward 3 or 4 months and now we're way up here? I think that is a likely scenario. And Gareth, this is probably one of the things that is going to force the Fed to pivot, I think, in 2024, is that there's not going to be liquidity. And that I think the dollar is going to force them to.
I think you're right about that. I think the dollar strength, and even again, my concern going back to yields is that as fast as yields are rising, I mean, we know basically one of the things I'll bring up is we know that in March, banks essentially collapsed Silicon Valley because yields were basically hitting 4%. Well, now you're approaching 5%. And we know the housing market has essentially not decimated in terms of prices collapsing, but it's just frozen. It's frozen at this point. Unless you're a cash buyer, then you can do something. But again, that's about it here. And then just going back to the dollar, I wanted to show this chart. This is an amazing trend line on the weekly dollar chart. And again, we see the 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and we're now on the 12th green candle. We are approaching this trend line again. And we can see over here it pulled back. Here when it hit, it bounced. Over here, it kept on bouncing off. So this is a great long-term trend line going back to 2021. And you brought this up, and I had it up on my chart too, is if we go back to 2014, here's that move up, 12 weeks up in a row. I actually used just a measured move here, about 8%, just over 8%. And what's interesting here is if we replicate that 8% move here, right, we get essentially just above that trend line. So a pierce of that trend line right there. And so, again, all we can do is guess about things, but I would think you and I would be in the agreement is that you're probably getting to at least some sort of minor pullback like we saw in 2014. And we have the trend line here and the measured move to kind of replicate and give us that synopsis. But the question, like you brought up, is it just going to be a small pullback before we rip higher, or will it be a top where we start to head back down?
Was that pullback? I'm just curious. I don't remember. It was the pullback in 2014. Did it occur in mid-October? I feel like I remember that
question here. Let's take a look. Yes.
Okay.
Wow, that's freaky.
Yeah,
that's
interesting, right?
Point.
Yeah, mid-October, and we're about there. And what's also interesting, by the way, is look at the I have the euro chart up against the USD against the US dollar.
Bring that up.
This looks like these distribution phases where you get sort of like 1, 2, 3, and I'm thinking, all right, well, the dollar. I mean, 12 green weeks in a row, right? Like I've been very bullish on the dollar for a long time, but even those bullish people on it, right? We were going to admit that at some point it's going to have a pullback, right? Like nothing. Yeah. The markets move stochastically. I'm like, well, at some point, I guess what would happen is the euro could bounce back against the dollar, right? And maybe it even back tests this or something, right? And then it continues to go down. And we could get an example where Bitcoin or risk assets start to sniff this out. So I even would wonder if you get a point where the dollar starts to pull back, but when it does pull back, maybe at that point Bitcoin is actually starting to pull back itself. People are gonna be like, well, why is Bitcoin pulling back if the dollar is down? It's because people are starting to worry about the next move by the dollar, not the.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you soon with the next video. Thank you so much for watching.